There's something about certain women that you can't quite explain. They don't walk in shouting, but when they enter a room, the atmosphere shifts. They may not hold titles or take center stage, but something about them feels different. These women have seen things survive, things been through fire, and somehow still carry a fragrance of heaven on their lives. And maybe you've wondered, why do some women endure more than others? Why are they misunderstood, overlooked, or attacked without cause? Why do they feel things more deeply, dream more wildly, and hurt more silently than everyone around them? If you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. You may be one of them. This isn't a video about surface strength or curated perfection. It's not about popularity platform or outward success. No, this is about something deeper, something sacred, something hidden. This is about the quiet power of a woman set apart by God. A woman who may not look chosen in the eyes of the world, but who carries unmistakable evidence that heaven has placed its hand on her life. And if you're watching this right now, I need you to know your story is not ordinary, your struggle is not wasted, and your journey has not gone unnoticed. Because what if I told you that the pain you walk through wasn't just an unfortunate chapter, but the very ground where God was writing your calling? What if your sleepless nights, silent prayers, and unspoken aches were actually signs that you carry something sacred? Not everyone can go through what you've gone through and still worship. Not everyone can be broken and still bless. And not everyone who falls has the strength to rise and lift others with them. But here you are. Not just surviving, becoming, not just making it, maturing, not just existing, awakening. In this video, we're going to peel back the layers and reveal the 10 unmistakable signs of a woman God has set apart. These aren't the flashy traits you see in highlight reels. They're often unseen, even uncelebrated. But heaven recognizes them. They're forged in fire, grown in dark places, and sealed in secret moments with God. These signs are not badges of pride. They're marks of purpose. In the moment you begin to see them not as burdens, but as blessings, your whole perspective shifts. Maybe you've always felt a little different. Maybe you've been told you're too intense, too emotional, too ambitious, too quiet, too much, or not enough. But what if everything you've been labeled was really just evidence that you were built for something greater? What if the isolation, the warfare, and the relentless ache in your spirit weren't random but divine? What if God has been shaping you, sharpening you, and setting you apart, not for everyone's stage, but for His specific assignment? So I invite you to stay with me, not just to listen, but to lean in, to let this message confirm what you've suspected in your spirit for a long time, that you've been chosen, not for comfort, but for calling, not for applause, but for anointing, not for safety, but for significance. Let's walk through this together, one mark at a time, because you're not crazy, you're not lost, you're not weak, you're marked, and you're about to see why. Let's begin. Part 1, Marked by Fire, When Pain Becomes Power. Every woman carries a story, but some carry battle scars. Not just the kind you can see, but the kind woven deep into the soul, evidence of what she's been through, not just what she survived. A woman who is marked by fire doesn't wear her pain as a crutch or let it define her. Instead, her pain becomes the very place where her strength is forged. She walks differently not because life has been easy, but because she's had to fight for every inch of her healing, and that fight has become her foundation. Being marked by fire doesn't mean you came through life untouched. It means the flames didn't consume you. It means that what tried to break you ended up building you. Just like gold is refined in heat, your spirit was purified through hardship. The pressure didn't crush you, it clarified you. And now you walk not in spite of what you endured, but because of what God did in it. Think of Joseph, betrayed by his brothers, falsely accused, thrown into prison and forgotten everything in his life, screamed brokenness. Yet when he stood face to face with the very people who hurt him, he didn't retaliate, he revealed perspective. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. That's the voice of someone marked by fire. The wound didn't vanish, but it transformed. And the moment it transformed, it became a weapon of wisdom. That's what happens when pain turns into power. Modern day examples are everywhere if you look closely. There's the single mother who raised her children while battling illness, now leading support groups for other women. There's the businesswoman who lost everything in a failed venture, but now mentors young entrepreneurs with insight forged through failure. There's the survivor of abuse who now runs a nonprofit walking others out of darkness with a light she had to find the hard way. These aren't celebrities or influencers. These are real women refined by fire and walking in quiet authority because of it. A common misconception is that chosen women live easy lives, but scripture and experience tells a different story. Chosen women are often carved out of crisis. Their strength isn't accidental, it's intentional. Their boldness wasn't inherited, it was built in the trenches of life. God didn't skip over them in pain, He met them in it and gave it purpose. That's the divine exchange. That's the mark of fire. So if you're carrying a scar, if you've walked through betrayal, loss, rejection, or seasons that nearly took your breath away, know this: you are not damaged goods. You are evidence of divine preservation. Your pain wasn't pointless, it was preparation. And the very thing that almost took you out is the thing God is now using to raise you up. Ask yourself, what has my pain taught me? What strength did I find in the fire that I didn't know I had before? What weapon did I gain in the wilderness? Because every woman marked by fire holds a testimony that silences shame and awakens hope in others. And as we step forward, there's something else that begins to emerge in women like you. Something that feels like restlessness, like a stirring you can't shake. You start to feel like you're outgrowing the space you're in, like something more is calling your name. That's not random. It's the next mark. Let's talk about it. Part 2. Called out by discontent. The ache that means you're chosen. There's a kind of ache that doesn't come from heartbreak or betrayal. It's not the pain of what happened, it's the tension of what hasn't happened yet. It's that quiet discontent that shows up in the middle of a good life and whispers, "There's more." It's the feeling you can't quite explain to others because nothing is technically wrong, yet your spirit feels unsettled. That, dear sister, is not confusion. It's not immaturity. It's not ingratitude. It's divine discontent, a holy ache reserved for those God is calling into more. Discontent, when it's spiritual, doesn't show up in chaos. It often shows up in comfort. You may have the job you prayed for, the home you dreamed of, or the family you cherish. Yet something inside you begins to stretch. You start to feel like the room you're in no longer fits the woman you're becoming. It's not pride, it's growth. It's not rebellion, it's revelation. God is stirring you not to frustrate you, but to focus you. He's waking you up not to take something from you, but to call something out of you. Esther lived this exact tension. She had favor. She had position. She had comfort in a palace that others would die to enter. But then a decree went out against her people, and everything changed. She could have stayed silent, hidden behind royal garments and golden gates. But discontent began to rise. The palace was no longer enough when purpose was calling from the other side of the gate. Mordecai's words to her weren't soft, they were a summons. Who knows but that you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? The time didn't announce itself with a trumpet. It stirred in the form of discomfort. I once spoke with a woman who worked as a nurse in a successful hospital career. Everything on paper looked perfect. Yet she couldn't shake the sense that God was calling her to something different. She wrestled with guilt for feeling unfulfilled. But eventually that restlessness led her to open a home for trafficked women, combining her medical training with her spiritual burden. What started as discomfort became destiny. Her ache had direction. One of the greatest mistakes women make is suppressing that holy nudge. We talk ourselves out of it. We label it as being dramatic or unstable. But what if that discontent is the very evidence that you're called to something beyond the ordinary? What if the shaking in your spirit is the first sign that heaven is shifting your season? The lesson here is vital. Discontent is not always a sign to quit. It's a signal to ask. Ask God what He's saying. Ask where He's leading. Ask what's next. And be prepared to move. The nest you're in may have been safe, but if it starts to feel tight, it could be because your wings are ready. So the next time you sense that tug, that ache you can't quite explain, don't run from it. Lean into it, let it teach you, let it lead you. And trust that when God stirs your spirit, he is preparing your steps. Because a woman marked by divine discontent is a woman heaven is getting ready to reposition. Now, as you begin to sense more deeply and walk more boldly, another mark may rise, one that feels heavy but holy. It's the gift of sensitivity, the kind that allows you to weep for things others overlook. Let's look at what it means to be trusted with heaven's tears. Part 3. Carriers of Compassion, the Weight of Divine Sensitivity. There's a tenderness in certain women that can't be explained by personality or upbringing. It's deeper than emotion, more precise than empathy. It's a spiritual sensitivity, a sacred kind of compassion that goes beyond feeling bad for someone and steps into the realm of carrying their burden in prayer. These women don't just see pain, they feel it. They don't just hear brokenness, they absorb it. And while the world may dismiss them as too sensitive, heaven sees them as trusted. Because when God wants to deliver comfort, he often does it through a woman whose heart has been softened by sorrow and shaped by intercession. Being sensitive in spirit doesn't mean being weak. In fact, it often requires extraordinary strength. The chosen woman who carries this hidden mark is the one who weeps during worship, while others stay dry-eyed. She senses when someone in the room is silently suffering, even when they're smiling. She prays for strangers, mourns over injustices she didn't witness firsthand, and grieves things others pass by without thought. This isn't emotional instability, it's spiritual availability, and it comes at a cost. Look at Jesus in John 11:35. The shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept, carries immeasurable weight. He knew he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead, yet he paused to feel the pain of the moment. He didn't rush past grief. He stepped into it. That's the compassion of heaven. And when a woman carries that same kind of heart, she becomes a vessel for healing, intercession, and breakthrough. Not through noise, but through nearness. I remember a woman named Deborah who worked in a small town church. She wasn't loud and she wasn't on stage, but she was always praying. When a child was sick, she'd fast quietly. When a marriage was failing, she'd be found pacing the sanctuary after hours. No one assigned her to do it. She simply felt things others didn't. And when people began to open up to her, they always said the same thing. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I feel safe with you. That's what divine sensitivity creates, safe places where God can move. This kind of compassion is not without its challenges. Women who carry it often feel drained, overlooked, or burdened without knowing why. They may cry without explanation or carry anxiety that isn't even their own. That's why they must learn how to steward their sensitivity, not to close their hearts, but to bring those weights to the Lord. Intercessors need rest. Feelers need covering, because what they carry is real and it's holy. The lesson here is clear. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. It's a function of your calling. It's not something to toughen up against or grow out of. It's something to protect, refine, and direct. You are not too much. You are deeply connected to what heaven feels. And when you bring those tears to the feet of Jesus, you're planting seeds of breakthrough in places that others may never see. As your compassion deepens and your discernment sharpens, something else often begins to happen. You'll start to notice that without even trying, you draw opposition, strange resistance, and people who misunderstand you. Attacks that seem to come out of nowhere. Don't worry, it's not personal, it's spiritual. Let's talk next about why the enemy targets chosen women before they even realize they're rising. Part 4. Targeted by Warfare. Why the enemy fights you so hard. There's a kind of resistance that doesn't make sense on the surface. It's not tied to disobedience or poor choices. It's not caused by outward rebellion or internal failure. It's the kind that shows up when you're doing the right thing, when your heart is surrendered, when your steps are aligned with God's voice, and still conflict, still opposition, still struggle that rises up without warning and without reason. If that's been your reality, let me tell you something. The enemy doesn't want you to realize you're being fought because you're dangerous. The enemy never wastes energy on someone who isn't a threat. Hell doesn't strategize against someone who's standing still. But when a woman begins to move forward in obedience, when she starts to pray bold prayers, speak truth, and walk in purity and purpose, that's when warfare intensifies. Not because she's doing something wrong, but because she's carrying something holy. Your life carries weight in the spirit, and that weight registers on hell's radar before it ever shows up on heaven's stage. Think of Mary, the mother of Jesus. It was followed by conflict. The moment she conceived the Savior, she became a target. Rumors swirled. Her reputation was questioned. And before she ever held Jesus in her arms, she was fleeing to Egypt under the threat of death. Why? Because the enemy sensed what she carried. Because when destiny is growing in you, darkness always tries to destroy it. I once met a woman named Rachel who told me how every time she stepped into new ministry territory, her life unraveled. The week she launched her mentorship program for teen girls, her car broke down, her son got sick, and a close friend turned on her. She thought maybe she had missed God until she realized the pattern. Every time she said yes to something, God-breathed warfare followed. It wasn't personal, it was prophetic. She wasn't being punished, she was being opposed because she was advancing. The attacks may look different for each woman. Sometimes they come as confusion, doubt, financial pressure, or relational strife. Other times it's emotional exhaustion or spiritual heaviness. But they all serve the same purpose: to wear you down, make you question your worth, and tempt you to retreat. The goal isn't just to hurt you, it's to silence you, to get you to step back from the very thing you were created to carry. The lesson here is powerful opposition is often a compliment in the spirit. It's a clue, a spiritual flare letting you know that something in your life is working, that you're aligned, that you're effective, that you've become a threat. Don't be surprised when attacks come, expect them, recognize them, and stand firm through them. You weren't built to break. You were equipped to endure. When you feel the arrows flying, remember what Ephesians 6 tells us. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. So armor up, don't shrink, worship louder. So armor up, don't shrink, worship louder, pray deeper, keep building. Because if the enemy is fighting you this hard, it's because what you're carrying is worth it. But sometimes the real battle isn't just external, it's the slow ache of being unseen, of feeling misunderstood, and of walking faithfully yet still being left out. That kind of pain doesn't come with noise. It comes with silence. And in our next part, we'll discuss how isolation isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's God's way of protecting what He is still perfecting. Let's move on to that. Part 5, Hidden in Plain Sight. When isolation is divine strategy. There's a loneliness that chosen women often carry, a quiet ache that shows up even in a room full of people. It's not because they're doing something wrong or because their hearts are closed. It's because God is doing something sacred. When God sets someone apart for a unique purpose, He often hides her first, not to punish, but to prepare, not to reject, but to refine. And while others are being seen celebrated and surrounded, she may be tucked away unseen by the crowds, but never unnoticed by heaven. Being hidden is one of the most misunderstood seasons in a woman's journey. We live in a world that rewards visibility, praises platform, and celebrates loudness. But God works differently. He plants before He promotes. He conceals before He commissions. And when a woman is hidden in plain sight, serving behind the scenes, worshiping without applause, obeying in secret, that's not smallness. That's strategy. Heaven hides what it's healing, shelters what it's shaping, and protects what it's preparing to reveal. Think of David the shepherd boy. While his brothers stood in front of the prophet Samuel, eager and ready, David was out in the fields tending sheep, overlooked by his own father. Uninvited in the moment, but God didn't choose the one who was visible. He chose the one who was faithful in the shadows. And when David was finally brought forward, he wasn't just anointed, he was already prepared. He didn't need the spotlight to shape him. The pasture did that. The silence did that. The hiddenness trained his hands for battle and his heart for leadership. I think of women like Naomi, who quietly carried grief and still stewarded the lineage of the Messiah. Or Hagar alone in the desert crying out in despair, only to discover that El Roy, the God who sees, was watching her the whole time. And then there are modern stories too, like the woman who serves faithfully in her local church year after year, never asked to speak on stage, but mentoring young women one by one, changing lives without a microphone. She's not invisible. She's insulated. She's being used by God in ways that don't always show up on Instagram, but echo through eternity. One of the biggest lies the enemy tells a hidden woman is that she's been forgotten. But here's the truth. God often does his best work in secret. The soil doesn't reveal the roots, but without them, the fruit would never come. Your current season may feel like silence, but it's really strategy. God is growing you downward so you can carry what he's planning to build upward. The lack of attention isn't rejection, it's protection. The lack of invitation isn't exclusion, it's insulation. He's preserving you for the right time, the right door, and the right assignment. So if you're walking through a season where you feel hidden, don't despise it. Don't rush it. Don't confuse quiet with absence. God is closer than you think, and the depth he's developing in you now will become the strength you need when the doors finally open. He's not preparing you for a moment. He's preparing you for a mantle. And once you begin to see the beauty in being hidden, you'll notice something else. Even in the silence, even without the spotlight, you're still growing. You're still becoming. And in the very places where no one else sees you, God is cultivating something eternal. Let's talk next about what happens in the darkness and why that hidden growth is the most powerful kind of all. Part 6. Growing underground. Becoming strong before being seen. Every tree that stands tall in the light of day spent long seasons pushing roots into the dark. Before anyone ever marvels at its height or sits beneath its shade, it first learns how to survive underground. The same is true for a woman marked by God. Her strength doesn't come from applause. It comes from the places where no one claps. Her power isn't built in public. It's formed in private. And while the world is chasing platforms, she's learning to grow in silence. Because the roots matter more than the reach. Growing underground means you're becoming without being seen. You're learning lessons that don't trend. You're building endurance that can't be posted. You're cultivating discipline when no one is watching and choosing obedience even when there's no reward. That kind of growth isn't glamorous, but it's unshakable. It's the kind of growth that sustains you when storms come. It's what allows you to carry weight without collapsing. You don't just sprout, you stretch, not upward but downward first. Think of Ruth gleaning in the fields of Boaz long before anyone knew her name. She wasn't chasing influence. She was just faithful with what was in front of her. Day after day, she picked up scraps. But heaven saw her posture, and in due time, her hidden faithfulness positioned her for legacy. That's how God works. He doesn't rush fruit, he builds roots. And the more deeply you're willing to grow underground, the higher he can trust you to stand later. I once met a young woman named Elena who had a powerful voice but never pushed herself forward. For years, she led worship in a small home group, singing to 10 people in a living room, with no stage, no spotlight, and no sound system. She questioned whether her gifts would ever go beyond that room. But during that hidden season, her anointing deepened. Her worship became warfare. Her heart grew tender to God, and eventually doors opened, not because she pushed, but because she had been prepared. Her unseen obedience created capacity. And when she was finally seen, she didn't perform. She ministered. Growing underground isn't punishment. It's preservation. It's where God removes the pride, reshapes the motives, and refines the vision. It's where your prayers become deeper, your hearing becomes sharper, and your identity becomes clearer. It's where you learn to rely on the voice of God more than the applause of people. It's where he teaches you how to survive droughts and bloom anyway. The lesson here is simple but sacred. Don't rush visibility. Cherish preparation, because when your roots are deep, you don't fear the wind. When your growth has been shaped by silence, your impact can withstand the noise. What you build in secret becomes the foundation of what God reveals in time. And what seems like delay is often the mercy of God shielding you from exposure until your spirit is strong enough to carry the call. As you embrace the beauty of underground growth, something unexpected starts to rise joy. Not the surface kind, but the deep, defiant kind. The kind that sings in dry places and laughs when nothing around you makes sense. Let's talk next about how joy becomes your secret strength, especially when everything says you should have given up by now. Part 7, Singing in the Storm, the supernatural joy of the chosen. There's something remarkably powerful about a woman who smiles in sorrow, who worships while wounded, and who keeps showing up with praise in places where most people would collapse. She's not in denial. She's not pretending everything is perfect. She just carries something deeper than her circumstances. It's not optimism. It's not fake positivity. It's joy, raw, rugged, and real. The kind of joy that refuses to be extinguished even when the storm doesn't pass. It's not born in comfort. It's carved in crisis. Joy, unlike happiness, is not dependent on outcomes. Joy, unlike happiness, is not dependent on outcomes. It doesn't wait for breakthroughs to begin singing. It doesn't need clarity to lift its hands. It's rooted in who God is, not in what life looks like. That's why the Apostle Paul could write from prison, "Rejoice in the Lord always," not because chains felt good, but because joy wasn't chained with him. It was his resistance. It was his release. It was his reminder that even in darkness, light still wins. I once sat with a woman named Denise who had just experienced the loss of her husband. Grief clung to her like fog, and yet she spoke with a warmth that enveloped the room. She said, "I can't explain it, but God has met me here with a joy that doesn't erase the pain it carries me through it." That's it. That's what sets these women apart. They don't avoid the valley. They worship through it. They grieve with hope. They ache and still adore. They cry and still confess God's goodness in the same breath. Supernatural joy is disruptive. It confuses the enemy because hell expects you to fold, to rage, to fall apart. But instead you lift your head and whisper, "Still I trust you." That's not just survival, it's spiritual warfare. Joy isn't just a feeling, it's a weapon. When you declare God's faithfulness in the middle of a drought, you take back ground. When you laugh again after heartbreak, you prophesy over your own life. When you choose gratitude in the face of loss, you shake something loose in the spirit. The Proverbs 31 woman is often quoted for her strength and dignity, but there's one phrase that reveals her true superpower. She laughs without fear of the future. That's not naive. That's anchored. That's the confidence of a woman who's seen storms, stood through them, and knows her foundation won't crack. She knows who holds her days. She's been through enough to understand that joy is not a detour. It's the road through. The lesson is not to fake joy or to suppress sorrow. It's to recognize that joy is holy. It's not weakness to smile in the storm, it's strength. It's not shallow to dance in the desert, it's prophetic. When a chosen woman sings through suffering, she joins the song of generations who trusted God in famine, in fire, and in fear. She carries forward the sound of survival, and once you've learned how to sing in sorrow, you begin to carry a kind of peace that defies explanation. But that peace also brings clarity, and sometimes that clarity calls you to draw new lines. Because not every relationship survives your rising. In the next part, we'll explore why setting boundaries after betrayal is not cruelty, it's wisdom, and it's exactly what Jesus modeled. Let's go there. Part 8, Obedient in the Small, Faithfulness with What No One Sees. There's a beauty in the unseen. Yes, the one whispered in private when no one is watching, no one is clapping, and no one is counting. It's the yes that doesn't get a platform, doesn't get praise, and doesn't get posted, but heaven sees it, and heaven values it, because faithfulness in small things is the birthplace of greatness in the kingdom of God. The chosen woman understands that real obedience doesn't begin in the spotlight, it begins in the shadows. It begins with the unseen moments, the extra mile taken when no one asked the prayer, prayed when no one else knew the act of service, done without expecting anything in return. We live in a culture obsessed with visibility, constantly measuring worth by numbers, applause, and influence. But God is not impressed by platforms. He is moved by purity. He is drawn to devotion. He promotes based on stewardship, not spotlight. Luke 16:10 says, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much." That verse isn't just advice, it's alignment. God watches how we handle what's hidden to determine if we're ready for what's public. And when a woman commits to being obedient in the small, she aligns herself with heaven's rhythm. I think of the widow in Mark 12 who gave 2 small coins at the temple. Others gave from abundance. She gave from sacrifice. And while her offering may have seemed insignificant to others, Jesus saw it and called it great. That's the power of faithfulness. It magnifies in the eyes of God what the world calls small. Or consider Tabitha, also known as Dorcas in the book of Acts. She didn't preach or lead crowds. She made clothes for widows. She served quietly. She stitched in secret. And when she died, heaven remembered. God raised her back to life not because of public ministry, but because of private impact. I once knew a woman named Carol who spent 20 years cleaning her small church building. No title, no paycheck, just faithfulness. Every week she wiped down the pews, scrubbed the toilets, prayed over the chairs, and left notes of encouragement in the nursery. She did it quietly without seeking recognition. But when she fell ill, dozens of families came forward to testify how her quiet faithfulness had touched their lives. Her unseen obedience had rippled further than she ever imagined. That's what happens when you remain consistent in the quiet. You're planting seeds that will outlive you. The lesson is simple but profound. You don't need to be seen to be significant. You don't need to be famous to be faithful. God will never forget a single act of obedience done in love. Whether it's making coffee for your family, serving in your community, without seeking credit, mentoring a girl whom no one else notices, or interceding behind closed doors, you are seen and remembered. You are storing treasure in heaven. So before we rush to the next assignment, let's not overlook the value of the current one. The doorway to more in God's kingdom always swings on the hinges of what we do with less. And when you've been faithful with little for long enough, heaven starts opening doors that no one can shut. But when those doors open, not everyone will celebrate. In fact, some of your greatest obedience will require you to leave behind what once felt safe. In the next part, we'll explore what happens when promotion provokes opposition and how to hold your head high when elevation invites both honor and criticism. Let's step into it together. Part 9. Building Others. How Chosen Women Multiply Legacy. Legacy isn't built by how much you gather for yourself. It's measured by how much you pour into others. A chosen woman understands that true greatness is never about climbing a ladder alone. It's about reaching back, lifting others, and creating pathways so the next generation can walk further, faster, and with less fear. She knows that the oil on her life wasn't meant just for her, it's meant to overflow. Her story, her scars, her strength, they become the soil where others can grow. And in the kingdom of God, that kind of multiplication isn't optional, it's essential. We often picture legacy as something left behind at the end of life. But for the woman marked by God, it begins now. It starts with every daughter you mentor, every sister you encourage, every child you bless, and every weary heart you remind of who they are. Chosen women don't hoard wisdom. They share it. They don't compete with other women. They call them higher. They don't wait until they feel ready. They open their mouths, their arms, and their lives to be a blessing in real time. Think of Naomi and Ruth. Naomi could have stayed bitter, closed off, and silent. Instead, she taught Ruth how to navigate a foreign land, how to position herself with grace, and how to listen for the right moment. Because of Naomi's willingness to pour into others, Ruth walked into her purpose. She became part of the lineage of Jesus. That's what legacy looks like. It's not about fame. It's about fruit. It's about influence that outlives your presence. I remember a woman named Monique who had survived abuse, financial hardship, and years of silence. When she finally found healing, she didn't stay quiet. She started a small group for single moms at her church, not because she was perfect, but because she remembered what it felt like to have no one. Over time, that circle of women grew into a ministry. Monique never had a title, but her faithfulness built something stronger than any stage could. She built people. And that made her a legacy maker. Chosen women know that building others takes intention. It means being willing to share your journey, not just the highlights, but the hard parts too. It means choosing presence over performance, substance over status. It means affirming the women around you even when you're still waiting for your own breakthrough. Because when you invest in others, heaven takes notice, and multiplication becomes inevitable. The lesson is this: the oil on your life was never just for you. It's to light lamps, to heal wounds, and to call forth destiny in those who don't see it yet. Every word of encouragement, every prayer whispered, and every act of service poured out into another soul becomes a brick in a kingdom legacy that will stand long after you're gone. And here's the miracle: what you build in others often blesses you in return. Your strength grows deeper, your joy expands, and your impact multiplies in ways you could never achieve on your own. As you continue building people, something beautiful begins to happen. God opens your eyes not just to who you are, but to the kind of world He's calling you to shape. You stop thinking small. You start praying bigger. You begin seeing your own story as part of a much larger tapestry. In the final part of our journey, we'll discuss how chosen women walk with vision, how they see beyond today, and step boldly into a future soaked in purpose. Let's finish strong. Part 10. Living Set Apart. The quiet confidence of a called woman. There is something different about a woman who knows she's been called not by applause, not by culture, and not by her own ambition, but by God Himself. She doesn't walk like everyone else because she doesn't answer to the same voices. Her confidence doesn't come from being the loudest in the room. It comes from knowing that even when the room is silent, heaven is still speaking over her. This is the quiet confidence of a called woman. She doesn't need to announce herself because her life carries an atmosphere. She doesn't need to defend her worth because her identity is already sealed. She walks set apart, not above others, but apart from the need to prove anything. To live set apart means you stop measuring your value by what's trending. You're no longer swayed by shifting opinions or temporary titles. You become rooted, anchored, content in your calling. It doesn't mean you isolate yourself, it means you consecrate yourself. You make different decisions, not because you're better, but because you're building something eternal. You decline certain invitations. You walk away from certain conversations. You choose depth over noise. That's not pride, that's clarity. That's what happens when your identity is shaped in the secret place instead of on the stage. I think of Deborah, a prophetess and judge who didn't need a pulpit to lead. She sat beneath a palm tree and carried the authority of heaven in her posture. Or Anna, the widow in Luke 2, who spent decades worshiping, fasting, and praying in the temple. She was never featured on a scroll, yet she was the first to proclaim the arrival of Jesus to the faithful. These women weren't flashy, but they were faithful. They weren't trending, but they were trusted. And that trust gave them access to divine moments that changed history. I once met a woman named Teresa who worked as a hospital janitor for over 30 years. Most people never knew her name, but patients knew her prayers. Nurses knew her wisdom. Doctors came to her for peace when their hearts felt heavy. She never preached a sermon, yet she carried more spiritual authority than many who do. Why? Because she had settled into the confidence of her calling. She didn't chase a platform. She built one through her presence. Her quiet faithfulness carved out a sacred space in the middle of the mundane. That is the mark of a woman who lives set apart. The lesson here is profound. Being set apart isn't about being seen, it's about being sent. You're not here to blend in. You're here to bless, to break strongholds, and to bring light into shadows. Your power isn't loud, it's lasting. And when you understand that you stop trying to fit where God never called you to function, you no longer see your uniqueness as a burden. You embrace it as a banner. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone. You just have to walk with the one who called you. That walk will carry a rhythm the world can't always understand, but it will carry power, peace, and purpose. Living set apart means living with vision eyes fixed on something greater than now, a heart aligned with eternity, and a soul anchored in the presence of God. And from this place, everything else flows. Ministry becomes overflow, not performance. Joy becomes rooted, not reactive. Purpose becomes sustained, not seasonal. And you, daughter of God, begin to radiate a kind of strength that doesn't shout, it simply shines. Because when a chosen woman walks with quiet confidence, the atmosphere shifts. Now that we've reached the end of this journey, we'll wrap it up in the final conclusion, one that celebrates the marks, the lessons, and the undeniable grace that rests on your life. Let's close it out together. You've made it. Through 10 chapters, 10 revelations, 10 sacred truths carved not in stone, but in the lives of women just like you. Maybe you didn't expect to find yourself here today, nodding through the screen, with your heart thudding in familiarity, as if someone finally gave voice to your silent ache. Maybe you came out of curiosity, or maybe you came feeling tired. But now you're here wiser, seen and stirred, and that's not by accident. It never was, because God doesn't send messages without meaning. He doesn't spotlight stories just to entertain. He illuminates them to awaken, to call out what has long been buried, to remind the chosen that they are not alone, not overlooked, and not crazy for feeling the things they feel. He moves through whispers, scars, silenced tears, and even laughter in dry places. And today, if your heart recognized the marks we named, the pain that forged you, the divine discontent that won't let you settle, and the intercession that leaves you weeping in prayer closets, no one else visits then, sister. That's heaven confirming what earth forgot you've been marked all along. There is no formula for a chosen woman. There is only faithfulness. She does not need the world's validation when she carries heaven's assignment. She is shaped in solitude, stretched by sorrow, and strengthened in secret. And yet she rises not loudly but steadily, not rushed but radiantly. She lifts others even when her own arms feel tired. She builds with whispers and worship, with silence and service. And she does it not to be known, but to make him known. And the beautiful irony, her hiddenness has never hidden her from God. While others only see the chapter you're in, God's been holding the whole story. He saw the midnight cries you never posted. He counted every tear as sacred ink. He watched as you forgave without applause, stood tall after betrayal, and chose holiness in a world that laughs at purity. And he smiled not because you were perfect, but because you were present. You showed up, you kept going, you said yes. That yes echoes in eternity. So now what do you do after a word like this? After recognizing your reflection in the mirror of biblical legacy and modern-day courage, you walk forward not with fear, not with comparison, and not waiting for someone else to affirm what God already spoke. You walk knowing that the same God who found Esther in a palace, who called Ruth in a field, and who trusted Mary with heaven's greatest assignment, still calls women today. Women like you. Women who carry oil others don't understand. Women whose joy confuses the enemy. Women whose intercession shakes atmospheres. And one more thing, this journey is just beginning. Legacy starts where comfort ends. So take what you've received and plant it. Pour it. Pass it on. Teach your daughters. Encourage your sisters. Love the women who are still bleeding quietly, still wondering if their scars disqualify them. Because now you know better. Now you carry revelation. Now you walk as one who doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. If this word stirred something in you, if you feel called, seen, or simply strengthened, don't keep it to yourself. Let your yes be heard. In the comments type, I'm marked, and I choose to walk in it. Let the enemy hear it. Let heaven record it. Let your own heart believe it. And before you go, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Someone else is still waiting for the words that just found you. Be the reason they believe again. God bless you, beloved. Your story is still unfolding, and trust me, the best pages haven't even been turned yet.